Hello and welcome back to another evening together. Tonight we're going to do something a little different. We're going to talk about one of the greatest television shows ever made, but we're not here to recap the plot or rank the seasons or argue about whether Trinity or the ice truck killer was the better villain. No, tonight we're here to talk about the cracks. The little moments and sometimes the not so little moments where the logic of this incredible show doesn't quite hold up. We're talking about the biggest plot holes in Dexter. Now, before we get into it, I want to be clear about something. Pointing out plot holes in a show you love isn't the same as saying the show is bad. It's actually the opposite. The fact that we've watched these episodes closely enough to notice these things, that we care enough about the details to go, wait a second, that doesn't quite work. That's a sign of how good the storytelling is. You don't pick apart the logic of a show you don't care about. You just stop watching. So think of this more like a late-night conversation between two people who've rewatched the series more times than they'd probably admit. We're not here to be angry about it. We're here to have fun with it. Dexter ran for 8 seasons on Showtime from 2006 to 2013. Then it came back with New Blood in 2021, Original Sin in 2024, and now Resurrection is ongoing. That is a massive amount of storytelling. Hundreds of episodes across decades of production with different writers, different showrunners, and a mythology that just kept expanding. When you build a world that detailed over that many years, things are going to slip through the cracks. Plot points will contradict each other. Characters will forget things they should remember. Timelines will get fuzzy. And when your main character is a forensic blood spatter analyst, who also happens to be a serial killer operating under the noses of his own colleagues. Well, let's just say the opportunities for logical stretching are pretty generous. Tonight we'll cover a lot of ground. We'll start with Dexter's daily life and all the ways his routine should have gotten him caught long before anyone ever suspected him. Then we'll talk about the people who came close to figuring him out and why their investigations fell apart in ways that don't always make sense. After that, we'll look at Miami Metro as an institution and have a loving but honest conversation about why this particular police department might be the least effective investigative unit in the history of fictional law enforcement. Then we'll get into the later seasons where the show's logic started to stretch even further. And finally, we'll look at the newer entries in the franchise, New Blood, Original Sin, and Resurrection, and the new inconsistencies they've introduced. Plenty to talk about tonight. But if you like what I do here and want a way to support the channel, consider subscribing down below. It really does help. But for now, get comfortable, settle in, and let's talk about America's favorite serial killer and all the times he really should have been caught. So let's start at the beginning. Or rather, let's start with the everyday. Because one of the most fascinating things about Dexter as a show is how much time it spends on the mundane. Dexter Morgan goes to work, he picks up donuts, he drops the kids off at school, he goes on dates, he attends birthday parties and barbecues and awkward family dinners. And then, in between all of that, he stalks, captures, kills, and disposes of human beings. And the show wants us to believe that he does this seamlessly, that the seams between his normal life and his secret life never show. And for the most part, the show pulls it off because it's a well-written show with a brilliant lead performance from Michael C. Hall. But when you start pulling at the threads, the fabric gets a little thin. Let's start with what might be the single most iconic piece of incriminating evidence in the entire series, the blood slides. If you've watched the show, you know what I'm talking about. Dexter keeps a wooden box filled with glass microscope slides, each one containing a single drop of blood taken from every person he has killed. It's his trophy collection, his ritual. Every kill, he takes a small blood sample and adds it to the box. Over the course of the series, that box fills up with dozens upon dozens of slides, each one a direct piece of physical evidence linking Dexter Morgan to a specific murder victim. And where does he keep this incredibly damning piece of evidence? Inside the air conditioning unit in his apartment. Now, think about that for a second. Dexter is a forensic analyst. He understands better than almost anyone how physical evidence works, how it's found, how it's analyzed, and how it can destroy a person's life in a courtroom. And his hiding spot is an AC vent in an apartment that, over the course of 8 seasons, is entered by his sister Deborah, who actually lives with him at certain points, by his girlfriend and later wife Rita, by various babysitters, by Jamie Batista, by law enforcement officers conducting searches, and by the FBI during the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation. Frank Lundy and his task force are literally hunting for the Bay Harbor Butcher. They know the killer is likely in law enforcement, they know the killer keeps trophies, and nobody ever thinks to check the air conditioning unit of one of the forensic analysts in the department. I understand that hiding spots have to be somewhere, and that the show needs to keep the tension alive by having the slides always be at risk of discovery without actually being discovered too early. I get that from a storytelling perspective. But from a logic perspective, an AC vent is one of the first places a thorough search would cover. Law enforcement sweep teams are trained to check inside walls, behind fixtures, inside appliances, and inside ductwork. It's not some genius hiding spot. It's where a teenager might hide something they don't want their parents to find. For a trained forensic professional operating under the heightened scrutiny of a federal investigation, it feels like a significant oversight. And the thing is, the show itself proves this point. In Season 2, when the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation is at its peak, the blood slides do get found, but they don't get found in Dexter's apartment through good police work. Dexter plants them in Sergeant Doak's car as part of the frame job to pin the Butcher killings on Doakes. And then, in a moment of truly staggering irony, Dexter is assigned as the lead forensic technician to analyze his own trophy slides. He's literally handed the evidence of his own crimes and told to run the tests on it. And what does he do? He wipes the box clean of fingerprints while his FBI colleagues are in the next room. The Bay Harbor Butcher is running the forensic investigation into himself, and nobody finds that arrangement even slightly suspicious. To be fair, the reason Dexter gets that assignment makes a kind of internal sense. He's the department's blood expert. The slides are blood evidence. Of course they give it to him. But in any real investigation, especially one involving potential law enforcement suspects, there would be external oversight. You wouldn't let a member of the same department that's under suspicion handle the key physical evidence. The conflict of interest alone would be disqualifying. Fast forward to Season 7, and the slides finally do get Dexter in trouble, but only because Deborah literally walks into his apartment and finds the entire collection spread across his coffee table alongside his kill tools. She asks him point blank if he killed all those people. He says yes. And while that scene is one of the most powerful moments in the series, the fact that it took 7 full seasons for anyone in Dexter's life to stumble across evidence that was hidden in an air vent is a stretch. A dramatic, compelling stretch, but a stretch. Now let's talk about how Dexter gets rid of the bodies, because this is where things really start to require some generous suspension of disbelief. Dexter's disposal method is consistent throughout the original series. He dismembers his victims, a skill he presumably developed through his understanding of human anatomy from his forensic work, places the body parts into heavy-duty black garbage bags, weights the bags down, loads them onto his boat, the Slice of Life, and motors out into the Gulf Stream to dump them in deep water. He's been doing this for years before the show even starts. By the time we meet him in Season 1, he's an experienced killer with an established routine. And over the course of 8 seasons, the body count just keeps climbing. The issues with this method are numerous. First, Miami is one of the busiest waterways in the United States. The Port of Miami, the Intracoastal Waterway, the various marinas, they're all heavily trafficked by commercial vessels, private boats, fishing charters, Coast Guard patrols, and marine law enforcement. Dexter is routinely taking a personal boat loaded with garbage bags full of dismembered human remains into these waters, often at night, often alone. The idea that over a period of many years he never once encounters a Coast Guard patrol asking for a routine check, never gets stopped for a random inspection, never has another boater pull alongside him at an inopportune moment, that's asking a lot. Second, the oceanography of it. Dexter dumps the bags in the Gulf Stream, which is a powerful current that moves water and anything in it northward along the coast. The theory is that the current carries the bags out to deeper water where they'll sink and decompose without being found. But the Gulf Stream is not a disposal unit. It's a complex system of currents and countercurrents. Bags can shift, drift, catch on underwater structures, get pulled into eddies, or simply not sink as planned. The idea that dozens, potentially hundreds, of bags over many years never washed ashore, never got caught in fishing nets, never got spotted by a dive team, never attracted unusual patterns of marine life that might draw scientific attention, is extraordinarily unlikely. And the show actually acknowledges this. In Season 2, recreational divers find Dexter's underwater graveyard. Bags of dismembered remains sitting on the ocean floor. This discovery triggers the entire Bay Harbor butcher investigation and becomes the central crisis of the season. So the show itself demonstrates that this method is discoverable. It's just that it takes an awfully long time for anyone to look in the right place. And when they do find it, the discovery is treated as this shocking, unexpected event, when in reality, with the volume of remains Dexter has been dumping, it probably should have happened much sooner. Then there's the matter of the slice of life itself. Dexter's boat is his primary tool for body disposal. He uses it after nearly every kill. Over the years, that boat has had blood on it, biological material on it, cleaning chemicals on it, and all the trace evidence that comes with transporting dismembered human remains on a regular basis. Now, Dexter is a forensic analyst, so he knows how to clean. He's meticulous about it. But here's the thing about forensic evidence, and Dexter himself should know this better than anyone. You cannot perfectly clean a surface that has been repeatedly exposed to biological material over a long period of time. Blood seeps into wood grain, into fiberglass seams, into hardware joints. Luminol would light up that boat like a Christmas tree. Modern forensic techniques can detect biological material at the molecular level, even after extensive cleaning. When the Bay Harbor butcher investigation identifies the killer as someone who likely uses a boat for disposal, the investigation focuses on boat registrations and marina records. But nobody ever actually inspects Dexter's boat. Nobody runs a forensic sweep of the slice of life. Given that Dexter is a member of the department being investigated and he owns a boat that's registered at a marina that could be cross-referenced with the geographic profile of the dump sites, you'd think at least a casual inspection would be warranted. But it never happens. And there's another element of the body disposal that I've always found amusing in a dark sort of way. Dexter regularly transports large, suspicious-looking garbage bags from various locations to his boat. He does this through public areas, parking lots, marinas with other boaters around. In Season 7, Lagerta even has photographs of Dexter carrying black garbage bags onto the slice of life, which she uses as evidence during her investigation. But before Lagerta puts the pieces together, nobody ever questions why the quiet forensic lab guy is loading heavy garbage bags onto his boat at odd hours. In any major marina, people notice things. Boat owners are observant. Live-aboard communities are practically neighborhood watch programs, and yet Dexter moves through these spaces like a ghost. Let me talk now about the kill rooms themselves, because the logistics of what Dexter does before and after each kill are genuinely impressive from a dedication standpoint, but almost impossible from a practical one. Dexter's kill ritual is elaborate. He stalks his target for days or weeks, learning their routines and schedules. He selects a location, often the victim's own home or a remote building. He breaks in, he covers the entire room in plastic sheeting, floor to ceiling, to prevent leaving any forensic evidence. He sets up a table for the victim, usually covered in more plastic. He lays out photographs of the victim's own crimes, their own victims, as a kind of moral confrontation. He lights candles. And then he waits for the target to arrive, subdues them with an injection of M99, straps them down with plastic wrap, and performs the kill. That's an enormous amount of preparation. The plastic alone would require regular purchases, rolls and rolls of industrial plastic sheeting, purchased over years, probably from the same hardware stores or suppliers. Now, most retail purchases aren't individually tracked, but if you're buying industrial quantities of plastic sheeting on a recurring basis, that does create a pattern, especially if someone were to, say, pull your credit card records as part of an investigation into a serial killer known for wrapping rooms in plastic. And then there's the M99, etorphine. It's an incredibly powerful opioid tranquilizer, roughly 10,000 times more potent than morphine. It's not something you can pick up at a pharmacy. It's strictly regulated, primarily used by veterinarians for sedating large animals like elephants and rhinoceroses. It requires specialized licensing to obtain. The supply chain for M99 is tightly controlled precisely because it's so dangerous that even skin contact with a small amount can be lethal to humans. In the show, Dexter somehow maintains a steady supply of the substance for over 2 decades. The original series shows him using it consistently from his very first kills. Original Sin actually devotes time to showing how young Dexter initially acquires etorphine, sneaking into a horse-track facility, but maintaining a long-term supply of one of the most controlled substances in veterinary pharmacology without ever triggering a DEA flag or a supply chain audit is a significant logical gap. Somebody somewhere has to be supplying this, and those transactions would leave a trail. It's worth noting that New Blood actually changed the drug from M99 to ketamine, which is much more commonly available and easier to explain. Fans were not happy about this retcon, and Original Sin reversed it back to M99. But the switch highlighted a real issue. The writers themselves recognized that M99 was implausible and tried to correct it, only to reverse course when fans objected. The practical question of how Dexter gets his hands on this stuff was never satisfactorily answered across any version of the show. Now here's one that I think about probably more than I should, and it's less about forensic evidence and more about basic math. How does Dexter find the time to do all of this? Think about what his life looks like on paper. He works a full-time job as a blood spatter analyst for Miami Metro Homicide. That's not a 9-to-5 desk job. Crime scenes happen at all hours. He gets called in at night, on weekends, during holidays. He has to be present at scenes, collect evidence, run lab analysis, write reports, testify in court occasionally, and be available for his colleagues. On top of that, for the first 4 seasons, he's maintaining a relationship with Rita. They go on dates. They spend time with her kids, Aster and Cody. They eventually get married and have a baby, Harrison. After Rita's death, Dexter is a single father with a toddler. He has babysitters and help, sure, but he's still responsible for a child. And simultaneously, he's running a secret operation that requires an absurd amount of time. Identifying a target alone can take days. He monitors police databases, tracks unsolved cases, follows leads. Then comes the stalking phase, where he follows the target for days or weeks to learn their schedule, confirm their guilt, and plan the kill. Then there's the setup, acquiring materials, selecting a location, wrapping the room in plastic. Then the kill itself, which involves getting the target alone, subduing them, performing the ritual, killing them, dismembering the body, bagging everything, cleaning the scene, and removing the plastic. Then transportation to the marina and the boat disposal run out into the Gulf Stream and back. We're talking about a process that from start to finish, for a single kill, probably takes a minimum of several days and more likely a week or 2. And Dexter does this regularly, multiple times per season, which in the show's timeline represents roughly a year each. Now, Rita occasionally notices that Dexter is distracted or unavailable, and this causes tension in their relationship. That's realistic, but she never connects his absences to anything more sinister than workaholism or emotional unavailability. Even when he disappears in the middle of the night, even when he comes home at strange hours with flimsy explanations, even when his phone is off for extended periods. I've always thought the funniest version of the scheduling problem is in the later seasons when Dexter has Harrison as a toddler. Any parent listening to this right now knows exactly what I mean. You can barely find time to do laundry with a baby in the house, let alone maintain a comprehensive serial killing operation with prep work, execution, and cleanup. The idea that Dexter is getting up at 2 a.m. not for a feeding but to go dismember someone in a plastic-wrapped room across town before getting back in time to drop Harrison off at daycare, it's genuinely one of the more entertaining logical stretches the show asks you to accept. And his co-workers don't seem to notice either. Dexter shows up at work and functions normally. He's not perpetually exhausted, he's not making mistakes, he's not distracted during critical forensic analysis. For a man running a double life that requires this level of physical and mental exertion, he's remarkably composed. The show explains this partly through Dexter's nature, that he lacks normal emotional responses, that he's able to compartmentalize in ways a neurotypical person couldn't. And that's fine as a character explanation. But it doesn't quite address the simple physics of the situation, which is that there are only so many hours in a day. Now, let me talk about one of the more specific plot holes from the early seasons, and it's one that I think gets overlooked because it happens during a storyline that's primarily focused on something else. In Season 2, when Rita discovers that Dexter is hiding something, the show creates a situation where Dexter needs a cover story for his suspicious behavior. His solution is to pretend that he's a drug addict, specifically a heroin addict. He starts attending Narcotics Anonymous meetings as part of this cover, which is where he meets Lila, which kicks off that whole storyline. The problem is Rita. Rita's ex-husband, Paul Bennett, was a genuine drug addict. Not just a casual user, a serious, violent addict whose behavior destroyed their family. Rita lived with that man. She witnessed firsthand what drug addiction looks like. The physical signs, the behavioral changes, the mood swings, the track marks, the periods of incoherence, the withdrawal symptoms. She knows what an addict looks like because she loved one and was hurt by one. And Dexter displays none of these signs. Zero. He has no track marks on his arms. He shows no signs of intoxication, no drowsiness, no impaired coordination. He doesn't exhibit withdrawal symptoms. His behavior, while sometimes secretive, doesn't follow the patterns of addiction that Rita would be intimately familiar with. He's essentially claiming to have a condition that his own partner has extensive personal experience recognizing, and she just accepts it. Now, you could argue that Dexter claims to be early in his addiction, or that he claims to be in recovery rather than active use. And sure, that provides some cover. But Rita is specifically established as someone who would recognize the signs, and the show treats her acceptance of this story at face value rather than interrogating it in a way that would feel more honest to her character. It's a plot convenience that allows the NA storyline to happen, but it does require you to believe that Rita's hard-won instincts about addiction just don't kick in. The NA group itself is more defensible. People at meetings generally don't interrogate newcomers about whether their addiction is real. The whole point of those spaces is acceptance and support, but Rita should know better. And the fact that she doesn't is less about Rita being naive and more about the show needing the cover story to work. All of these issues, the blood slides, the body disposal, the kill rooms, the schedule, the fake addiction, they all point to a central tension that runs through the entire series. The show needs Dexter to be both incredibly meticulous and incredibly exposed. He has to be smart enough to evade detection for 20 plus years, but also vulnerable enough that we feel tension every time someone gets close to the truth. And most of the time, the show manages that balance beautifully. It's only when you step back and look at the totality of it that the logical gaps become apparent. But speaking of people getting close to the truth, let's talk about that. Because some of the most compelling and also most frustrating plot holes in Dexter come from the investigations that almost brought him down. Sergeant James Dokes is in many ways the show's most tragic figure. Not because of how he dies, though that is tragic, but because he's right. He's right about everything. From the very beginning, Dokes senses that something is fundamentally wrong with Dexter Morgan. He can't articulate it precisely, but his instincts tell him that the quiet, polite forensic analyst is hiding something dark, and he pursues that instinct relentlessly. In the first 2 seasons, Dokes follows Dexter. He confronts him, he gets in his face at work. He tells Dexter flat out that he's watching him, that he knows something isn't right. He's aggressive and direct about it, and every single one of his suspicions is correct. But here's where the plot hole comes in, and it's one that fans have discussed extensively over the years. Dokes is a trained detective. He was special ops military before becoming a cop. He has access to the full resources of Miami Metro homicide, including surveillance equipment, databases, forensic tools, and colleagues he could bring into the investigation. And what does he do with all of that? He follows Dexter around personally, openly. He confronts him publicly, gets into physical altercations, gets himself suspended, and ultimately pursues Dexter alone to an isolated cabin in the Everglades where he's captured and caged. A real detective who genuinely believed a colleague was a serial killer would not handle it this way. You don't tip off the suspect by following them openly. You don't get into fistfights with them at work. You build a case, quietly. You set up surveillance. You pull phone records. You track movements through toll cameras and cell tower data. You bring in someone from outside the department to ensure objectivity. You document everything meticulously so that when you do make your move, the evidence is airtight. Dokes does almost none of this. His investigation is all instinct and confrontation, which makes for great television but terrible police work. And the result is that instead of building an unassailable case against Dexter, he ends up kidnapped in a cage in the Everglades, framed for the Bay Harbor butcher murders, and killed in an explosion set by Lila West. And the aftermath of Dokes' death introduces another layer of logical problems. The FBI, led by Special Agent Frank Lundy, accepts that Dokes was the Bay Harbor butcher. The evidence that supports this conclusion is largely planted by Dexter, including the blood slides found in Dokes' car. But the circumstantial case is built on things like Dokes' military background, his history of aggressive behavior, his connection to the butcher's victims through his work, and the fact that he fled the country right before the investigation closed in. Now, some of that is genuinely suspicious, but Dokes was also actively protesting his innocence. He called La Guerta and insisted he was being framed. He was trying to gather evidence against the real butcher before he was captured. The slides appeared in his car under circumstances that should have raised questions. How did they get there? Were they planted? Is there evidence of tampering? In a real federal investigation, these questions would be pursued rigorously. But Lundy, who is presented as a brilliant and meticulous investigator, essentially closes the case based on the planted evidence and the convenient narrative. To be fair, the show gives Lundy some justification. Deputy Director Adams is pushing to close the case quickly. The evidence against Dokes is circumstantially strong. The department needs a resolution, and Dokes is dead, which makes him the perfect fall guy because he can't defend himself, so there are institutional pressures that explain why the case gets closed. But it still feels like an investigator of Lundy's caliber should have at least entertained the possibility that something didn't add up. And speaking of Lundy, he introduces his own plot hole just by being as close to Dexter as he is. Lundy is hunting a serial killer who operates within law enforcement, who has forensic expertise, who keeps blood trophies, and who has access to the investigative databases of Miami Metro. The profile practically screams forensic analyst. And yet Lundy, who works alongside Dexter for the entire season, who spends time in the same building, who has access to personnel records and background information, never seriously considers the blood spatter analyst as a suspect. The show explains this by having Lundy's profile focus on a perpetrator with a military or violent enforcement background, which fits Dokes better than the quiet, mild-mannered Dexter. And that's a reasonable investigative approach. Profiles are imperfect tools, and they can lead investigators astray. But there's a difference between a profile not pointing towards someone and an investigator failing to consider the person who has the most direct access to the evidence. In any real case involving potential insider tampering, The people who handle the evidence are the first to be scrutinized. Dexter isn't just near the evidence, he processes it, he analyzes it, he writes reports on it. He is quite literally the person through whom all the forensic data flows. And nobody in the FBI task force thinks that's worth a closer look. It's one of those situations where you can see what the show is doing. Dexter is supposed to be invisible. That's his superpower. He's the guy nobody suspects because he's quiet and helpful and seems harmless. And Michael C. Hall plays that dynamic brilliantly. But the gap between what the show tells us about Lundy, that he's an exceptional investigator who has caught dozens of serial killers, and what the show shows us, that he overlooks the most obvious suspect in his own task force, is a notable one. Now let's move on to Detective Joey Quinn, because his arc contains what might be the single most frustrating dropped investigation in the entire series. In Season 5, following Rita's murder at the hands of the Trinity Killer, Quinn becomes suspicious of Dexter, and to his credit, his suspicions are based on reasonable observations. Rita is murdered in her own home by a serial killer that Dexter had been tracking independently. Dexter's behavior around the Trinity investigation was erratic and personal. Quinn notices things that other characters don't, or at least things they choose not to pursue, so he decides to investigate. Quinn hires Stan Liddy, a disgraced former cop who's willing to work outside official channels. Liddy is effective. He actually uncovers real, concrete evidence. He discovers that Dexter was using the alias Kyle Butler during his interactions with Arthur Mitchell's family, the Trinity Killer's family. He photographs Dexter and Lumen Pierce on the deck of the Slice of Life in circumstances that are deeply suspicious. These are not hunches or gut feelings. These are photographs, documentation, evidence that Dexter was operating under a false identity and engaging in highly questionable activity on his own boat. Then Liddy gets too close. He attempts to confront Dexter directly, and Dexter kills him. This happens in Liddy's own van at the marina. Now here's where things fall apart logically. After Liddy's death, Quinn discovers his files. He has the photographs. He has the Kyle Butler alias. He has the connection between Dexter and the Trinity case. He has documentation that a private investigator working on his behalf was killed while investigating Dexter Morgan. Look, in any rational universe, this would be the beginning of a very serious conversation with law enforcement. At the very least, Quinn would report what he found to Internal Affairs or hand it over to federal authorities. Instead, Quinn drops it. The investigation just evaporates. From Season 5 onward, Quinn's suspicions about Dexter are essentially never mentioned again. He goes from being the only person actively investigating Dexter to being one of his casual work buddies. The show handles this by having Quinn's personal life take over his attention, his relationship with Deborah, his drinking, his general trajectory as a character who becomes increasingly self-destructive. But the evidence didn't go anywhere. Quinn is walking around with knowledge that Dexter used a fake name during a serial killer investigation, and that the man he hired to look into it wound up dead, and he just files it away mentally and moves on with his life. This is arguably the biggest waste of a storyline in the original series. The show spent an entire season building Quinn into someone who could genuinely threaten Dexter, gave him actual evidence rather than just suspicion, and then diffused the entire threat without explanation. It's particularly frustrating because Quinn had something that Dokes never managed to get: documented proof. Dokes had instinct, Quinn had photographs, and neither one of them was able to make anything stick, but at least Dokes had the excuse of being captured and killed. Quinn just chose not to pursue it. Now let's talk about Lieutenant Maria LaGuardia, because her investigation in Season 7 is one of the most compelling and also most tragically mishandled storylines in the show. LaGuardia finds a bloodslide at the church where Dexter killed Travis Marshall at the end of Season 6. She knows what bloodslide mean. She's been with the department long enough to remember the Bay Harbor butcher case, and she knows that bloodslide were the butcher's signature. This single piece of evidence is what triggers her to reopen the case, and LaGuardia does real detective work. She pulls boat ownership records for Miami Metro personnel. She cross-references missing persons reports with potential butcher victims. She compares timelines. She identifies Dexter as a possible suspect based on his background, specifically the childhood trauma of witnessing his mother's murder in a shipping container, the same kind of dismemberment that characterized the butcher's kills. She brings this to Captain Matthews, who dismisses it partly because he has personal loyalty to the Morgan family and partly because reopening a closed federal case would be politically catastrophic. Lagerta even confronts Dexter directly. She has him arrested for the murder of Hector Estrada. She brings him into the interrogation room and lays out her evidence: photographs of Dexter loading black garbage bags onto the slice of life, Estrada's wallet and bloody shirt, the circumstantial connections to the butcher profile. It's a genuinely strong investigation that any real detective would be proud of. But Dexter outmaneuvers her. He plants evidence to make it look like Lagerta was trying to frame him, using Estrada's bloody shirt from evidence storage and Lagerta's own fingerprints on the wallet. When Masuka runs the forensics, he finds an evidence number on the shirt, proving it was the same one from Estrada's 1973 arrest, meaning it was pulled from storage, not from a fresh crime. And Lagerta's prints are on the wallet. The frame reverses direction. Now it looks like Lagerta was planting evidence against Dexter rather than Dexter disposing of a victim. This is clever writing and it's dramatically satisfying, but it requires us to accept that Lagerta's investigation is completely derailed by a single counterattack. In reality, an investigator who had spent months building a case wouldn't be stopped by one piece of contradictory evidence. She'd investigate the contradiction. Where did the shirt come from? Who accessed the evidence storage? Is there surveillance footage of the evidence room? These are basic follow-up questions that Lagerta, as a career investigator, would naturally pursue. But the show doesn't give her the chance to do that because the season needs to end with a different kind of resolution. Deborah kills Lagerta in a shipping container at the docks. It's one of the most devastating moments in the series, the moment where Deborah crosses a line she can never uncross. But it introduces its own massive plot hole. Maria Lagerta was the lieutenant of Miami Metro Homicide. She was a public figure within the department and the community. She had openly accused Dexter of being the Bay Harbor butcher. She had been conducting an official investigation, or at least a semi-official one, into the case. And now she's dead, shot, in a shipping container, under circumstances that are, to put it mildly, suspicious. And the investigation into her death is essentially non-existent. The show moves into season 8 and Lagerta's murder is barely addressed. We later learn in New Blood that Angel Batista kept a personal file on Lagerta's death in his desk drawer at home, suggesting he always had doubts. But during the original series, no meaningful investigation into the murder of a high-ranking police officer materializes. No one connects the dots between her active investigation into Dexter and her death. No one asks the obvious question, which is why the woman who was trying to prove Dexter was a serial killer ended up dead before she could finish making her case. This is one of those plot holes that I think bothers fans more the further you get from the original airing. In the moment, the emotional impact of the scene is so powerful that you don't immediately question the aftermath. But on rewatch, it stands out. A police lieutenant who is investigating a colleague is murdered, and the department doesn't turn that into the most intensive investigation in their history. It doesn't add up. And while we're on the subject of people who knew Dexter's secret, it's worth taking a step back and looking at just how many people, over the course of the series, either discover the truth or develop strong suspicions. The list is longer than you might remember. Deborah knows fully from the end of season 6 onward. She watches Dexter kill Travis Marshall and eventually confronts him about it. She then spends season 7 in the incredibly difficult position of knowing her brother is a serial killer and trying to manage that knowledge while also protecting him. She becomes complicit, she destroys evidence, she kills Lagerta. It's one of the most psychologically rich arcs in the show. But it also means that the lieutenant of homicide is actively covering for a serial killer within her own department. Hannah McKay knows because she's a killer herself. She and Dexter have this complicated relationship built on mutual darkness. She's fully aware of what he is, and it doesn't bother her, which makes sense given her own history. But she's also a fugitive, which means her silence is as much about self-preservation as anything else. Lumen Pierce in Season 5 not only knows about Dexter, but participates in kills with him. She helps him track down the men who assaulted her, and she's present for multiple deaths. She eventually leaves Miami, and the show implies she'll keep the secret, but she's still a civilian who witnessed serial murder and chose not to report it. Miguel Prado in Season 3 learns Dexter's secret and even participates in a killing. He wants to be partners with Dexter to use the code for his own purposes. When Miguel starts going off the rails, killing people who don't fit the code, Dexter has to kill him too. But for a stretch of the season, an assistant district attorney is actively aware of and participating in vigilante murder. Then there are the people with strong suspicions who never quite get to certainty. Dokes knew. Quinn had evidence. LaGuardia had a case. Lundy was close. Isaac Serco figured out that Dexter was something more than a forensic analyst, though he was more interested in vengeance for Victor Baskoff than in exposing Dexter's broader secret. Even Matthews, in a conversation in Season 7, lays out the circumstantial case against Dexter in a way that suggests he understands more than he's letting on. He tells Dexter about LaGuardia's suspicions and essentially gives him a chance to prepare, which you could read as friendly concern or as quiet complicity. The accumulation of this knowledge is staggering. By the end of the original series, a significant number of people either know or strongly suspect that Dexter Morgan is a serial killer. In real life, secrets held by this many people don't stay secret. The more people who know, the more likely it is that someone talks, someone gets arrested for something unrelated and trades information, someone has a crisis of conscience, someone gets drunk at a bar and says the wrong thing. The statistical probability of all of these people maintaining silence indefinitely is essentially zero. But the show needs a secret to hold, so it holds. Each person has their own reason for staying quiet, and individually, those reasons are often compelling. Deborah is protecting her brother. Hannah is protecting herself. Lumen left and doesn't want to revisit the trauma. Quinn backed off for reasons the show doesn't fully explain, but that we can attribute to self-preservation and his complicated feelings about Deborah. Matthews is protecting the department and the Morgan family legacy. Taken one at a time, each instance of silence is defensible. Taken together, the pattern is wildly implausible. And that's honestly one of the most interesting tensions in the entire series. Dexter's survival depends not just on his own skill and caution, but on the collective willingness of everyone around him to look the other way. The show presents this as Dexter being exceptionally careful, but really, it's everyone else being exceptionally accommodating. Since we've been talking so much about the people who investigated Dexter and came up short, I think it's worth zooming out a little and looking at the institution itself. Because if there's one consistent thread that runs through every season of Dexter, one plot hole that's less a hole and more a foundation that the entire show is built on, it's the astonishing institutional blindness of the Miami Metro Homicide Department. Now, I want to say up front that I love these characters. Angel Batista might be one of the most genuinely good people in all of television. He's a solid detective, a loyal friend, and he goes through some really difficult personal stuff over the course of the series and handles it with more grace than most people would. Vince Masuka is legitimately funny, even when his humor crosses lines, and he's actually a competent forensic scientist when the plot lets him be one. Deborah is complicated and flawed and passionate, and she becomes one of the most compelling characters on the show. Even LaGuardia, who's often portrayed as an antagonist, is a skilled politician and investigator who's trying to navigate a very difficult professional environment. Individually, these are not stupid people. But collectively, as an investigative department, Miami Metro Homicide has to be one of the least effective units in fictional law enforcement history. And the reason is simple: the show needs them to be. If Miami Metro were even moderately competent at internal oversight, Dexter would have been caught in Season 1 and we wouldn't have a show. Let's walk through what Dexter does at work and how much of it should be raising flags. Dexter is a blood spatter analyst. His job is to visit crime scenes, analyze blood patterns, and write reports that help investigators reconstruct what happened. That's his lane. But throughout the series, Dexter routinely crosses that lane in ways that should attract attention. He visits crime scenes he isn't assigned to. This happens repeatedly across all 8 seasons. Dexter will show up at a scene because he's personally interested in the case, sometimes because the victim is someone he was stalking or because the killer is someone he wants to get to before the police do. In a real department, a forensic analyst showing up at scenes outside their assignment would be noted. It would raise questions about resource allocation at minimum and could suggest inappropriate interest in specific cases. He accesses police databases for personal use. Dexter uses the department's computer systems to research potential victims, to pull background information, to check criminal records, and to track people he's interested in killing. These are law enforcement databases with access logs. In any real agency, database access is monitored. Unauthorized searches, especially searches that don't correspond to active cases the user is assigned to, are flagged for review. This is specifically designed to prevent exactly what Dexter is doing, using law enforcement tools for personal purposes. But in the show, Dexter accesses these systems freely and no one ever audits his search history. He tampers with evidence. This is the big one. Dexter's position gives him direct access to physical evidence, lab results, and forensic reports. And he uses that access to protect himself and manipulate investigations on a regular basis. In Season 2, he's made the lead forensic analyst on the Bay Harbor butcher case, which means he's analyzing his own blood slide collection. He wipes the box clean of fingerprints. He controls the flow of forensic information to the investigation. He's essentially the fox guarding the henhouse, and nobody in the FBI task force recognizes the conflict of interest. In Season 7, he plants evidence to frame Laguerta, using items he accessed through his position at the department. In multiple seasons, he destroys or alters evidence that could connect him to crimes. There's even a confirmed production detail noted on the show's IMDb Goofs page that when Dexter shreds Laura Moser's file in the office, the document that actually goes through the shredder is a file for a completely different person, Estrella Carrazzo. Now, that's a prop error rather than a plot hole, but it's a fun little detail that captures the general vibe of how fast and loose Dexter plays with physical evidence at work. In a real forensic lab, there are chain of custody procedures for every single piece of evidence. There are sign-in sheets for the evidence room. There are access logs for computers and databases. There are regular audits to ensure that evidence hasn't been tampered with. And most importantly, there is independent oversight, quality control processes that are designed to catch exactly the kind of insider manipulation that Dexter engages in. The entire field of forensic science is built around the principle that evidence must be handled in a way that guarantees its integrity from collection to courtroom presentation. And Dexter violates that principle constantly from within the system without detection. Miami Metro appears to have almost none of these safeguards, or if they do exist, Dexter bypasses them so effortlessly that they might as well not be there. The show never shows us an audit, a database review, an evidence room inspection, or any other form of internal oversight that might catch what Dexter is doing. The department operates on trust, which is exactly the environment a predator like Dexter would need to survive. There's also the matter of the forensic science itself. Dexter's specialty is blood spatter analysis, or more accurately, blood stain pattern analysis. In the world of the show, this is treated as a precise, almost magical discipline. Dexter walks into a crime scene, looks at blood patterns on walls and floors, and reconstructs the crime with an accuracy that borders on clairvoyance. He can tell you the weapon used, the angle of attack, the position of the victim, the sequence of events, sometimes just from looking at a few drops of blood. In reality, the science isn't nearly that reliable. The Innocence Project has published analysis noting that bloodstain pattern analysis is far more subjective than the show suggests. A 2009 report from the National Academy of Sciences found huge uncertainties in the technique, noting that analysts often disagree with each other about the same evidence and that the field lacks standardized methodology. The organization that certifies a blood pattern analyst has minimal educational requirements for membership. In several real criminal cases, blood pattern analysis has been challenged in court as unreliable and potentially misleading. This doesn't make Dexter's character unrealistic per se. Blood spatter analysts do exist and they do provide testimony in real cases. But the show presents Dexter as an unimpeachable expert whose analysis is never questioned or verified by anyone else. His reports are accepted as gospel. His conclusions drive investigations. And this unquestioning acceptance of his expertise is part of what allows him to manipulate cases from the inside. If his analysis were subject to peer review, if other analysts were asked to independently verify his findings, some of his manipulations would almost certainly be caught. Now here's something that I find genuinely amusing about Miami Metro, and it's not a plot hole exactly, but more of a recurring pattern that makes the department look bad. Throughout all 8 seasons, the forensics team and detectives at crime scenes consistently handle evidence and bodies in ways that would make any real forensic scientist cringe. People walk through crime scenes without proper foot coverings. Detectives handle evidence without gloves. Bodies are touched, moved, and examined before the medical examiner arrives. In every state in the country, no one is supposed to touch a body at a crime scene until the medical examiner gives clearance. It's one of the most basic rules of crime scene procedure, and Miami Metro breaks it in essentially every episode. They also have characters picking up potential evidence with bare hands, walking through areas where trace evidence could be present, and generally treating crime scenes with a casualness that would result in massive contamination in any real investigation. Defense attorneys in Miami must have a field day with the chain of custody issues that Miami Metro creates on a daily basis. There are also some specific procedural errors that are tied to real-world inaccuracies in the show. Throughout Season 3, Miguel Prado is referred to as a district attorney. But Florida doesn't use that title. The equivalent office in Florida is called the state attorney. It's a small detail, but it's the kind of thing that suggests the writers were borrowing legal terminology from other shows or other jurisdictions without adapting it to the actual setting. And then there's the general question of security within the station itself. Dexter kills Oliver Saxon, the brain surgeon, in a holding room inside the Miami Metro police station in the series finale. He does it with a pen to the jugular while Saxon is restrained. It's captured on security camera. Angel Batista and Joey Quinn review the footage, and despite it clearly showing Dexter walking into the room and deliberately killing a restrained prisoner, they classify it as self-defense. Quinn even says he wishes he could have done it himself. Now I understand the emotional context of this scene. Saxon has been terrorizing the city. He shot Deborah. Everyone in the department wants him dead. And the security footage apparently shows Saxon making some kind of threatening move before Dexter strikes. But this is still a homicide committed on camera inside a police station. The victim was a restrained prisoner who was in custody and the responsibility of the department. In any real police department, this would trigger an automatic investigation by internal affairs, a review by the state attorney's office, and possibly criminal charges against the person who committed the killing. You cannot kill a handcuffed prisoner in a police station on camera and have it waved off as self-defense within minutes by 2 detectives who are personally involved. But that's exactly what happens. Batista tells Dexter he has everything he needs. Quinn says they're good, and Dexter walks out of the police station having committed a murder on camera and been cleared of it in the time it takes to have a cup of coffee. It's a perfect capstone to 8 seasons of institutional blindness. The department that never noticed Dexter's database searches, never audited his evidence handling, never questioned his presence at crime scenes he wasn't assigned to, never investigated the suspicious death of their own lieutenant, now watches him kill someone on camera and calls it a day. Miami Metro's commitment to not seeing what Dexter's doing is, in its own way, the most consistent thing about the show. I think the reason all of this works despite the logical gaps is that the show is fundamentally not about police procedure. It's about Dexter's internal life, his struggle between the darkness he feels and the normalcy he craves. The police department is a backdrop for that personal drama, not the focus of it. And when you're watching for the character story, for the relationship between Dexter and Deborah, for the cat and mouse dynamics with each season's villain, for the philosophical questions about justice and morality, the procedural gaps fade into the background. They're there if you look for them, but the show gives you so many other things to focus on that most viewers don't mind. But we're here tonight specifically to look for them, so here we are. And honestly, talking through Miami Metro's issues just makes me appreciate the show more. It takes a really well-crafted story to make you care so much about characters who work in the most dysfunctional homicide department in America. The fact that we love Angel and Deb, and even Masuka despite the professional environment they apparently operate in, is a testament to how good the writing and performances are. Now, since we've covered the institutional stuff, let's shift into what I think of as the second phase of Dexter's plot hole journey. Because if the first 4 or 5 seasons stretched credibility in manageable ways, the later seasons started to stretch it like taffy on a hot day. And I say that with love. Genuinely, some of my favorite individual moments in the entire series happen in seasons 6 through 8, but the logical gaps widen considerably. Let's start with season 6 and the Professor Geller twist, because this is one of those things that works brilliantly as a surprise, but falls apart under even casual scrutiny once you know what's actually happening. The season introduces us to Travis Marshall, a religious zealot who's staging elaborate, terrifying tableaus based on the Book of Revelation. He appears to be working under the influence and direction of Professor James Geller, a theology professor who seems to be the mastermind behind the Doomsday Killings. For most of the season, we see Geller and Travis together. They talk, they argue, they plan. Geller appears to be physically present in scenes interacting with the world around him. Then comes the reveal. Geller has been dead the entire time. Travis killed him before the events of the season, and every scene featuring Geller was actually Travis hallucinating, the same way Dexter sees Harry as a manifestation of his own internal dialogue. It's a cool twist conceptually. The parallel between Dexter's dark passenger and Travis's delusion is thematically rich. But the execution creates retroactive problems. There are scenes earlier in the season where Geller appears to interact with physical objects. Doors open, things are moved, actions are taken in the world that require a physical person. If Geller's imaginary, who did those things? Travis himself, presumably, but the scenes aren't staged in a way that makes that clear. The camera treats Geller as a real person occupying real space. And revisiting those scenes after the twist requires some creative reinterpretation that doesn't always hold up. Fans and critics have gone through the season, scene by scene, cataloging moments that don't work if Geller isn't real. And while some of them can be explained away, others are genuinely hard to reconcile. It's one of those twists that the writers clearly intended to be a shocking mid-season revelation, but didn't fully commit to the groundwork that would make the revelation airtight. The result is a twist that's powerful in the moment but leaky in hindsight. There's also a significant logistical issue in Season 6's finale that gets overlooked because of the huge emotional moment that overshadows it. When Dexter subdues Travis Marshall at the museum, he has an unconscious adult man, a large ancient sword, and his toddler son Harrison with him. He needs to transport all of this out of the building without being detected, in a building that would have security cameras, in a high-rise in Miami that would have elevator footage, lobby cameras, and potentially witnesses. Then later in the episode, Dexter takes the unconscious Travis to a church to set up his kill room. He's performing his ritual kill at an active crime scene, a location that Miami Metro has been investigating. The idea that he can do all of this without showing up on a single security camera, without being seen by a single person, without leaving a trace of his presence at a location where his own colleagues will later process evidence, is one of the bigger stretches of the season. And of course, the episode ends with the scene that changes everything. Deborah walks into that church and sees Dexter plunging a knife into Travis Marshall's chest. It's one of the most iconic moments in the series, but even this scene has a logical wrinkle. Deborah is there because she's come to tell Dexter something personal, something about her feelings. She walks into the church, finds the plastic-wrapped body, the candles, the whole ritual setup, and watches her brother commit murder. The emotional impact is massive, no question. But the fact that Dexter chose to perform a kill at a location that his sister, who is the lieutenant of homicide, knew about and was actively connected to through the investigation, that's not very code compliant. Harry's first rule is don't get caught. Setting up a kill room at a location where your homicide detective sister might reasonably show up is practically begging to get caught. Now let's talk about Lewis Green, because this is one of the most confounding dead ends in the entire series. Lewis is introduced in Season 6 as Masuka's intern, and right away there are signals that he's going to be important. He's obsessed with Dexter. He created a video game about serial killers. He sends Dexter the prosthetic hand from the ice truck killer case, which is not something a normal person does. He accesses Dexter's credit card and cancels it. He has a creepy fixation that builds across multiple episodes. Going into Season 7, many fans expected Louis to become a significant antagonist. Maybe he'd figure out Dexter's secret. Maybe he was connected to the ice truck killer somehow. Maybe his video game was actually based on real murders and he'd been researching Dexter for years. The possibilities were interesting. Instead, Lewis is shot and killed by Isaac Serco in one of the early episodes of Season 7. Just killed. On a boat. Because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. All that buildup, all those hints, all that viewer investment in where this character was going, and it amounts to nothing. He's a dead end. A literal dead end. Now, this isn't a plot hole in the traditional sense, it's more of a narrative bait and switch. The writer set up a thread and then cut it without resolution, but it does create a sense of wasted narrative real estate, and fans have been vocal about it for years. The Louis Green storyline is one of the most commonly cited examples of Dexter introducing a mystery and then abandoning it. Let's move on to Season 7 and 8 and the Hannah McKay situation, because this one has layers of implausibility stacked on top of each other. Hannah McKay is introduced in Season 7 as a serial poisoner with a complicated past. She killed multiple people, including her first husband and potentially a camp counselor who helped cover up murders during the Wayne Randall spree when she was a teenager. She's dangerous, she's smart, and she becomes Dexter's love interest. At the end of Season 7, Dexter turns her into the police after she poisons Deborah. Hannah is arrested and held for the murder of Sal Price, a true crime writer she killed with aconite applied to the tip of his pen. She escapes custody, she becomes a wanted fugitive. Her photo is distributed to law enforcement. She is actively being hunted by a U.S. Marshal, Deputy Marshal Clayton, who in Season 8 explicitly states that he shared her picture everywhere after receiving a tip that she might be in Miami. Despite all of this, Hannah moves around Miami with remarkable freedom throughout Season 8. She goes out in public, she visits places where she could be recognized, she interacts with people. She's spotted at a hospital when she takes Harrison in for medical attention, which prompts Clayton to intensify his search. And yet she continues to operate with minimal disguise and minimal effort to remain hidden. But the real test of credibility comes in the finale. Hannah needs to get from Miami to Argentina with Harrison. This means going through airport security. She needs identification that won't trigger an alert, since her name and photo are in law enforcement databases. She needs to pass through security checkpoints where identification is verified, faces are compared to photos, and cameras capture every person who moves through the terminal. A couple of episodes prior, Clayton stated he shared Hannah's photo everywhere. She was spotted at the hospital and Clayton was called in. Public awareness of her should be high. And yet, she makes it through airport security and onto an international flight. The show has Dexter create a distraction to help her. He plants a backpack under a seat and then tells a ticket agent that he saw the U.S. Marshal, Elway, place it there and walk away. This causes security to detain Elway and evacuate part of the airport, creating confusion that presumably helps Hannah slip through. But as multiple people have pointed out, airports have security cameras literally everywhere. They would review the footage, see that it was Dexter who planted the backpack, not Elway, and from there, it's a short step to identifying Dexter, connecting him to Hannah, and tracing her flight. What makes this worse is that Dexter uses his real identity in the airport. He's a known person. He's connected to Hannah through publicly available information. The idea that he could frame a U.S. Marshal inside an airport using his own face on camera and then walk away without consequences is almost comical in its implausibility. But we're not done with the finale yet, because the ending of the original series is where the plot holes reach their peak. After Deborah is shot by Oliver Saxon, she ends up in the hospital on life support. She suffers complications, a blood clot leads to a stroke, and she's left in a vegetative state with no chance of recovery. Here's what Dexter does next. He walks into the hospital during a hurricane while the building is being evacuated. He disconnects Deborah from life support. He picks up her body, he carries her through the hospital, past nurses and orderlies and other patients who are also being moved. He takes her out of the building, he loads her onto his boat, and he drives into the storm. Each step of this sequence raises questions. How does he disconnect life support in a hospital without triggering an alarm? Modern life support systems have monitoring equipment with alarms that activate if the patient is disconnected or if vital signs change. Even during an evacuation, these systems would still be monitored. How does he carry a dead body through a hospital without anyone stopping him? The show actually shows other people in the hallway, nurses moving patients, but nobody questions the man carrying a wrapped body out the door. And how does he take that body to the marina and put it on a boat during an active hurricane? The weather conditions alone would make this extremely dangerous, and marina facilities during a hurricane are typically closed and evacuated. Then there's the storm itself. Dexter drives a slice of life directly into a hurricane. The boat is destroyed. Search and rescue finds the wreckage, and there are no survivors. Dexter is presumed dead. His colleagues, his friends, the people who've known him for years, they all believe he died in the storm while trying to escape his grief. And then the final scene. Dexter is alive in Oregon or somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, working as a lumberjack, living in a small rented room, sporting a beard and flannel. He stares into the camera and the screen cuts to black. The questions this raises were the subject of enormous fan debate when the episode aired. How did Dexter survive a hurricane at sea that destroyed his boat? How did he get from the wreckage in the Gulf of Mexico to Oregon? He would have had no money, no identification, no resources. He would have been a person of interest in his sister's death. His disappearance during the storm would have generated a missing person investigation. How does a man who is presumed dead travel across the entire country and establish a new life in a completely different state without leaving a trail? The show provides no answers. It's meant to be ambiguous, maybe even mythic. Dexter disappears into a storm and reappears somewhere else, transformed or at least displaced. But Dexter has always been grounded in at least a version of reality. It's not a fantasy show, it's a crime drama. And in the context of a crime drama, having your protagonist survive a hurricane and teleport across the country without explanation is a significant departure from the show's own rules. I think what makes the finale so divisive isn't just the implausibility of the logistics, it's that the show chose shock value over coherence. The lumberjack reveal is supposed to be a gut punch. This idea that Dexter didn't find peace or justice, but simply moved on to a different kind of emptiness. And on a thematic level, there's something interesting there. But the thematic ambition doesn't resolve the practical questions, and for many fans, those practical questions undermine the emotional impact. The finale was so poorly received, in fact, that it was one of the driving forces behind the creation of New Blood years later. The franchise's producers essentially acknowledged that the original ending didn't work and promised a more satisfying conclusion. Whether New Blood delivered on that promise is its own conversation, and one we'll get to shortly. Before we move on, though, there are a few more late-season plot holes worth touching on because they contribute to the general feeling that the show's internal logic was becoming increasingly stretched in its final years. In Season 8, the character of Dr. Evelyn Vogel arrives in Miami and reveals that she helped Harry create the code that governs Dexter's killing. She's presented as a crucial figure in Dexter's origin, the neuropsychiatrist who understood what Dexter was and worked with Harry to channel his urges into something manageable. The problem is that Vogel has never been mentioned before, not once. In 7 seasons of exploring Dexter's past through flashbacks, conversations, revelations about Harry, and deep dives into the code's origins, nobody has ever referenced this woman. And now she's the most important figure in the history of Dexter's psychological development. It feels like a retcon, and not a particularly graceful one. The show asks us to accept that this pivotal relationship existed the entire time, but was simply never mentioned by anyone, including Harry's ghost, who appears to Dexter regularly to discuss the code and its implications. Vogel also brings with her the brain surgeon storyline, which has its own issues. But the core problem is the introduction of a character who's supposedly been central to Dexter's life since childhood, dropped into the final season without any prior setup. It's the kind of move that can work if the character is compelling enough to overcome the contrivance. And Charlotte Rampling gives a strong performance, but structurally, it's a stretch that many fans couldn't get past. Now let's talk about what came after. Because while the original series had its share of plot holes and logical stretches, many fans hoped that the revival would be a chance to tighten things up. Dexter New Blood was positioned as a corrective, a chance to give the character and the audience the proper ending that the original series fumbled. And in many ways, New Blood is a compelling piece of television. The setting change from sunny Miami to frozen Iron Lake, New York is genuinely refreshing. The dynamic between Dexter and his now teenage son Harrison raises interesting questions about whether the darkness is inherited or learned. And Clancy Brown as Kurt Caldwell is a strong villain with a creepy father figure energy that works well against Dexter's own complicated relationship with fatherhood. But New Blood also introduced its own set of plot holes and inconsistencies, some of which are arguably more glaring than anything in the original series because the show had the benefit of hindsight and a smaller, more focused story. When you're only telling 10 episodes, the expectation for internal consistency goes up. Let's start with the biggest and most controversial one, the ketamine retcon. Throughout all 8 seasons of the original Dexter, his sedative of choice is M99, also known as etorphine. It's a powerful opioid tranquilizer used primarily in veterinary medicine for sedating large animals. The show establishes this early and references it consistently. M99 is as much a part of Dexter's toolkit as his plastic wrap and his kill knives. It's mentioned by name. It's shown being injected. It's a signature element of his method. In New Blood, the drug changes to ketamine, without explanation, without anyone acknowledging the switch. Dexter, who has been using etorphine for over 20 years, is suddenly using a completely different substance. And the show treats this as if it's always been ketamine, which it demonstrably has not. The change appears to be a plot convenience. Ketamine is more commonly known, more widely available, and easier to trace in a way that serves New Blood's storyline about Angela discovering evidence against Dexter. The ketamine connection allows Angela to find injection marks on victims and connect them to Dexter through a chain of evidence that wouldn't work the same way with M99. It's a change made to serve the new story, but it comes at the cost of continuity with the original series. Fans were vocal about this. Really vocal. And interestingly, when Original Sin went into production, the prequel series explicitly went back to M99. Episode 5 of Original Sin actually devotes significant screen time to showing how young Dexter acquires a torphine for the first time, sneaking into a horse-track facility. The franchise essentially acknowledged the retcon was a mistake by reversing it in the next installment. But in New Blood itself, the ketamine switch remains one of the most discussed inconsistencies. Now let's talk about Angela Bishop and her investigation, because this is where New Blood's plot holes start to get structurally important. Angela is the police chief of Iron Lake, a small town in upstate New York. She's smart, she's dedicated, and she genuinely cares about her community. She's also the person who ultimately puts the pieces together and figures out that Jim Lindsay, the mild-mannered fish and game store employee she's been dating, is actually Dexter Morgan, the presumed dead forensic analyst from Miami who was suspected of being the Bay Harbor Butcher. And how does she figure this out? Primarily through internet research and a true crime podcast, Angela connects with a podcaster who's been looking into the Bay Harbor Butcher case. Through conversations with this podcaster and her own online research, she starts to see parallels between the butcher's methods and things she's observing about Jim Lindsay. She finds needle marks on the neck of Matt Caldwell's body that are consistent with injection, which she connects to the ketamine, which she connects to the butcher case through the podcast. Let me be clear about what the show is asking us to accept here. The FBI, with a full task force, with forensic resources, with database access, with Agent Frank Lundy leading the investigation, was unable to identify the Bay Harbor Butcher in Season 2. They investigated for months. They had the blood slides. They had the body recovery site. They had the full weight of federal law enforcement behind them, and they got it wrong, pinning the murders on Dokes. And now a small-town police chief in upstate New York working from a podcast and Google searches solves the case. I understand what the show is going for thematically. Angela represents the danger of the modern information age. The idea that in the era of true crime podcasts and internet sleuths, nobody's secrets are truly safe forever. And there's a version of this that could work if the show had built the investigation more gradually and given Angela more sophisticated tools to work with. But as presented, the investigative leap from true crime podcast to identifying a specific person as the Bay Harbor Butcher across decades and jurisdictions using publicly available information feels like a shortcut. It's made worse by the fact that the original FBI investigation had access to all of this information and more. Everything Angela can learn from a podcast, the FBI already knew. The difference is that the FBI accepted the Dokes explanation and moved on, while Angela has the benefit of fresh eyes and no institutional investment in the closed case. And again, thematically, that's interesting. The outsiders seeing what the insiders missed. But practically, the gap between Angela's resources and her conclusions is significant. Then there's the matter of Angel Batista's file. When Angela reaches out to Batista, who's now a sergeant in Miami, he reveals that he's kept a file on Maria LaGuerta's death in his desk drawer at home. He's apparently been carrying doubts about the official narrative for years. When Angela asks if they ever found out who killed LaGuerta, Batista responds non-verbally by pulling out the file. This is presented as if Batista always suspected something was wrong with LaGuerta's death. But in the original series, Batista showed no signs of this. He was one of Dexter's closest allies. He defended Dexter against LaGuerta's accusations. He warned LaGuerta to back off before she ruined her career. He was present during the events that led to her death and participated in the aftermath without raising concerns. The file feels like a retcon, a piece of information inserted into New Blood's story to create a bridge between the old series and the new one. It gives the ending weight because it suggests that Dexter's past is finally catching up to him, that even the people who trusted him most have started to question things. And dramatically, it works. But it requires Batista's character to have been secretly suspicious for years without any indication of that suspicion during the original series. There's also a factual wrinkle that New Blood doesn't address. Dexter didn't kill LaGuerta, Deborah did. If Batista's investigation ever led anywhere, it would point to Deborah as the shooter, not Dexter. Now, the argument could be made that the conspiracy to protect Dexter was what got La Guerta killed, so Dexter bears moral responsibility. And Deborah is dead by the time of New Blood, so a direct investigation into her isn't possible. But the show presents Batista's file as if it's evidence against Dexter specifically, when the physical evidence would actually implicate someone else. Now let's talk about how New Blood ends, because the finale contains what might be the most debated moment in the entire franchise. Harrison, Dexter's son, discovers the truth about who his father really is. He sees the evidence. He understands what Dexter has done, not just in Iron Lake, but throughout his entire life. And in the final confrontation, Harrison shoots Dexter in the chest with a rifle. It's positioned as Harrison's choice to end the cycle of violence, to refuse to become what his father is, to do what nobody else in the franchise has been able to do, and actually stop Dexter Morgan. It's a powerful moment. It's emotionally devastating. It was clearly intended to be the definitive ending that the original series failed to deliver. And for many fans, it was. But then Resurrection happened, and we learned that Dexter survived. The show reveals that Dexter was resuscitated at a hospital. He didn't die from the gunshot wound. He was taken to an emergency room and brought back. And while gunshot wounds to the chest are survivable depending on the location of the wound and the speed of medical response, the way the scene was filmed in New Blood's finale communicated finality. Harrison pulls the trigger. Dexter goes down. The scene is staged as a death. The emotional logic of the story requires it to be a death. Harrison makes the impossible choice, and the show asks us to feel the weight of that choice. Resurrection, undoing that death, introduces a kind of narrative whiplash. The ending of New Blood was presented as a statement, this is how Dexter's story ends. And then the franchise says, actually, no, there's more money to be made, let's walk it back. I realize that's a cynical reading and that the creative team may have always planned for Dexter to survive. But from the audience's perspective, the emotional contract of New Blood's finale was broken. There are also practical questions about the survival itself. Iron Lake is a small, remote town. The shooting happens outdoors in what appears to be a relatively isolated location. How quickly could emergency services arrive? Was someone nearby who called for help immediately? The show eventually explains the logistics, but the gap between how the scene reads in New Blood and how it's explained in Resurrection creates a continuity issue that the franchise has to spend time addressing. Let me now talk a bit more about some smaller but interesting inconsistencies in New Blood that contribute to the general feeling that the show is making things up as it went along in certain places. Dexter's injury recovery throughout the show is remarkably fast. In episode 8, he's attacked and kidnapped by Elric Kane. He crashes a truck, he runs through the woods, he gets shot in the leg, and the next morning he's functionally fine, walking around, making plans, operating at full capacity. Now, the original series also had this issue. Dexter gets hurt multiple times and bounces back faster than any normal person would. But it's particularly noticeable in New Blood because the show is only 10 episodes, so the compressed timeline makes the rapid recoveries stand out more. There's also the matter of how Dexter maintains his lifestyle in Iron Lake. He's living under a false identity, Jim Lindsay. He works at a fish and game store. He has a house, a life, a relationship with Angela. But how did he establish this identity? He arrived in Iron Lake after presumably faking his death and traveling across the country. He would have needed a new social security number, new identification, a plausible backstory. For a man who was presumed dead and whose name was in law enforcement databases, creating a functioning new identity is not trivial. The original series never explained the lumberjack ending, so New Blood essentially inherits that plot hole. How did Dexter get from the hurricane to Oregon to Iron Lake? What happened in the intervening decade? How did he suppress his urges for so long? The show addresses the urge suppression through Dexter's internal dialogue. showing him struggling to contain his dark passenger. But the practical questions of identity and travel are largely hand-waved. And here's one more thing about New Blood that I think is worth mentioning because it connects to a broader pattern in the franchise. The show has Dexter acquire his kill supplies in Iron Lake in ways that seem inconsistent with a man who's been hiding his identity for a decade. He breaks into the veterinary clinic to steal ketamine. He's seen on security cameras in various locations. He leaves behind more evidence than the Dexter we knew in Miami ever would. Part of this is intentional. New Blood is about Dexter getting sloppy, about the dark passenger coming back after years of dormancy, and Dexter not being as sharp as he used to be. That's a legitimate character choice, but it creates a tension with the premise that this is the same guy who evaded the FBI Miami Metro and multiple personal investigations for 2 decades. The Dexter of the original series would never break into a veterinary clinic on camera. The Dexter of New Blood does because the story needs him to start making mistakes. The character's competence level changes to serve the plot, which is a form of inconsistency even if it's dramatically motivated. Now let's shift to the prequels, because Original Sin, which premiered in late 2024, brings a whole new category of plot holes to the franchise. And these aren't just about individual scenes or character decisions, they're about the fundamental timeline of the entire Dexter universe. The biggest issue is straightforward. Original Sin is set in 1991. It follows a young Dexter who has just graduated from college and is starting his internship at Miami Metro as a forensic analyst. He's around 20 years old. Harry is alive and guiding him through his early experiences with the code. Deborah is a teenager. The whole thing is positioned as the foundational chapter of Dexter's story. The problem is that the original series gave us multiple contradictory birth years for Dexter. In the first few seasons, it's established that Dexter was 3 years old in 1973 when Harry found him in the shipping container after his mother, Laura Moser, was murdered. That puts his birth year at 1970. But in Season 5, Dexter attends his 20-year high school reunion in 2010, which means he graduated in 1990, which means he was born in 1972 or 1973. Then in Season 6, Travis Marshall gets a hold of Dexter's driver's license, which shows a birthday of February 1st, 1971. That's 3 different birth years across the run of the show. Original Sin picks the version of the timeline where Dexter is about 20 in 1991. Which would put his birth year around 1971. This mostly works for what the prequel is trying to do, but it creates cascading inconsistencies with specific details from the original series. If Dexter was born in 1971 and started at Miami Metro in 1991, then by Season 1 of the original show in 2006, he's been working there for 15 years. But the original series presents him as someone who is established but not necessarily a 15-year veteran. The dynamics with his co-workers, the way people interact with him, it doesn't always read as a decade and a half of shared history. Deborah's age changes even more dramatically. In the original series, Season 8 confirmed that Deborah was born 8 years after Dexter. If Dexter was born in 1971, Deborah would have been born in 1979, making her about 12 in 1991. But Original Sin presents Deborah as 16 or 17, only about 4 years younger than Dexter. That's a fundamentally different sibling dynamic. An 8-year age gap means Dexter was already a teenager when Deborah was a small child. A 4-year age gap means they grew up much more closely together, which changes the texture of their relationship in ways that ripple through the entire series. In the original show, Dexter seemed to have a somewhat protective, almost paternal role with Deborah, especially in early seasons. He looks out for her, he worries about her. There's a sense that he was the older kid who watched her grow up. With a 4-year gap, that dynamic is less pronounced. They're more like close siblings who came up together. And while that's a perfectly fine relationship for Original Sin to explore, it doesn't quite match what the original series established. Original Sin also introduces changes to character relationships that create retroactive inconsistencies. The prequel shows Dexter and Angel Batista working together from 1991 onward, and even establishes a connection through Harry, who is Angel's colleague, and in the prequel, a figure Angel looks up to. But in the original series, particularly in Season 1, the relationship between Dexter and Batista doesn't carry the weight of 15 years of shared history. They're friendly colleagues, sure, but there's no sense of the deep, long-standing bond that 15 years of working together and a connection through Dexter's deceased father would naturally create. They don't reference shared memories from the early days. They don't have the kind of shorthand that people who have known each other for a decade and a half typically develop. This is one of those prequel problems that's almost impossible to avoid entirely. When you go back and tell the origin story of characters whose later dynamics are already established, you're inevitably going to create friction with the existing canon. The writers of Original Sin knew this. They made creative choices about what to preserve and what to change, and some of those choices work better than others. One change that fans actually appreciated was Original Sin's decision to go back to M99 after New Blood's ketamine switch. As I mentioned earlier, Original Sin dedicates significant time to showing how young Dexter first acquires a torphine, visiting a horse track and stealing it from the veterinary supplies there. It's a nice piece of continuity repair, and it shows that the creative team was aware of the New Blood criticism. But it also highlights the franchise's ongoing struggle with internal consistency. If Original Sin can correct the ketamine retcon, why didn't New Blood just use M99 in the first place? There's another Original Sin inconsistency that's more subtle but worth mentioning. In the prequel, we see a young Deborah visiting their mother Doris's grave alone, and the show establishes that Deborah has a relationship with a character named Geo. But in the original series, Deborah's characterization in the early seasons suggests a somewhat different emotional landscape during her teenage years. The specifics don't perfectly line up, though they're close enough that you could argue it's just a matter of perspective and selective memory. Now let me circle back to Resurrection, because even though the show is still ongoing, the early episodes have already generated discussion about plot holes that build on the franchise's existing issues. The fundamental question that Resurrection has to answer is how Dexter Morgan, who was shot in the chest by his own son and left for dead in a small town where he was the prime suspect in multiple murders, manages to not only survive, but travel to New York City and begin rebuilding his life. The show addresses this by revealing that Dexter was taken to a hospital and resuscitated. His gunshot wound was survivable. Medical intervention saved his life. And that's physically plausible. People survive chest wounds. Emergency medicine can work miracles when the response is fast enough and the wound doesn't hit certain critical structures. But plausibility isn't the same as internal consistency. New Blood's finale was staged as a death scene. The emotional weight of Harrison's choice depended on it being final. If the creative team always intended for Dexter to survive, the filming of that scene is misleading, and if they didn't always intend it, and the survival was a later decision made to continue the franchise, then it's a commercial retcon rather than a storytelling one. Once Dexter is alive and moving in Resurrection, the practical questions multiply. He's a man who is publicly identified in Iron Lake. Angela Bishop knows who he is. Batista knows he's alive, or at least had reason to question his death. His fingerprints and DNA are in law enforcement databases. His face, while perhaps not widely known to the general public, is known to every law enforcement officer who ever worked the Bay Harbor butcher case or the Iron Lake murders. How does this man walk around New York City? How does he rent a room? How does he get a job? How does he buy food without a functioning credit card or bank account? How does he acquire the materials for killing when his method requires specific tools and supplies? The show has to address all of these questions, and early episodes suggest that Dexter is operating in a kind of underground, off-the-grid manner. But New York City is one of the most surveilled cities in the world. Cameras on every block, facial recognition technology, transit systems that require identification or at least generate data. Being anonymous in Manhattan is considerably harder than being anonymous in rural Oregon or a small town in New York State. Resurrection also brings back the question of Dexter's spectral companion. In the original series, Dexter sees and converses with the ghost of Harry Morgan, his adoptive father. Harry serves as Dexter's conscience, his guide, and his internal critic. In New Blood, after Harry, it becomes Deborah who appears to Dexter as his ghostly companion. In Resurrection, the show returns to Harry. The inconsistency isn't just which ghost appears, it's the rules of the ghost itself. Sometimes the ghost represents Dexter's superego, cautioning him against reckless behavior and reminding him of the code. Other times the ghost is more aggressive, pushing Dexter toward action or criticizing his choices. The ghost's personality and function shift depending on what the scene needs, which is understandable from a dramatic standpoint since the ghost is really just a manifestation of Dexter's internal state, but it creates a character who doesn't have consistent motivation or behavior across the franchise. Let me also mention something about Resurrection that ties into the franchise's longest-running plot hole, which is the question of surveillance. In the very first episode, the show has to deal with the logistics of Harrison's kill in a hotel. Harrison uses supplies from the hotel to set up his own version of a kill room. He uses a shower curtain, cleaning chemicals, and replaces items he uses like the toilet seat cover. But the show also has a conveniently broken security camera outside the kitchen's back door, which is how Harrison manages to dump the body unseen. Now, a luxury Manhattan hotel having a broken security camera is plausible in isolation. Equipment breaks, maintenance gets delayed. But in the context of a franchise that has relied on conveniently absent or broken surveillance for over a decade, it starts to feel like a pattern. Dexter can operate because cameras either don't exist where he needs them not to exist, or they happen to be broken at the exact right time, or nobody reviews the footage. It's the same issue that runs through the original series, the airport scene, the police station kill, the hospital in the finale, and now it's carrying forward into the new shows. There's something almost philosophical about this. In the real world, we live in an era of near total surveillance, especially in urban environments. Every phone is a camera, every store has security footage, every transaction creates a data point. The idea of a serial killer operating undetected for decades was always a stretch, but it was a stretch that felt more believable in the early 2000s when the original show started. By 2025, when Resurrection is set, the surveillance landscape has changed so dramatically that the show has to work harder to explain how Dexter remains invisible. And sometimes, as with the broken hotel camera, the explanations feel more like contrivances than solutions. But I think that's also part of what keeps the franchise interesting. Each new installment has to grapple with the evolving reality of its premise. A serial killer who can't be caught was thrilling in 2006. In 2025, it's almost impossible. And watching the show navigate that impossibility, sometimes gracefully and sometimes clumsily, is part of the experience of being a Dexter fan. Let me touch on one more franchise-wide inconsistency before we start to wind down, and it's one that I think is actually kind of charming in its persistence. Dexter's scar moves sides. In Season 1, Dexter has a large scar on his left side. In Season 2, the scar has moved to his right side. This is a continuity error that's been documented on the show's IMDb page and various fan sites. And while it's obviously a makeup department oversight rather than a plot hole, it's a perfect little example of the kind of detail that changes between seasons and nobody on the production team catches. There are others like it scattered throughout the series. Deborah's car changes models between episodes. Rita's marriage certificate lists a birth date that would make her 4 months old at the time of her first marriage. Dexter's birth year changes 3 times. The number of floors in Dexter's apartment building seems to change. The briefing room used in the pilot is never seen again, replaced by a completely different room in subsequent episodes. Dexter has books on his shelf from 1998 that are about technology that would have been obsolete by the time of the show. These are the kind of small continuity errors that accumulate in any long-running production. But for a show about a man whose survival depends on meticulous attention to detail, they carry an extra layer of irony. You know, one of the things I find really fascinating about digging into all of these plot holes is how many of them connect back to a single source: Harry's code. The code is the backbone of the entire franchise. It's what separates Dexter from a random serial killer. It's what gives him his moral framework, such as it is, and it's what the show uses to justify our emotional investment in a character who, by any objective measure, is a monster. But the code itself has some significant logical problems when you look at it closely. The code has two primary rules: don't get caught, and only kill people who deserve it, specifically murderers who have escaped the justice system. Harry taught Dexter these rules when Dexter was a teenager, recognizing that his adopted son had homicidal urges that couldn't be eliminated but might be channeled into something less destructive. Rather than having Dexter institutionalized or hoping the urges would go away, Harry created a system that would allow Dexter to kill while minimizing the risk of discovery and directing his violence toward people who, in Harry's view, had it coming. On its face, the code is elegant. It's a pragmatic solution to an impossible problem, but it falls apart in several ways, and the show, to its credit, explores some of these failures. But it doesn't always explore them as fully as it could. First, there's the question of confirmation. The code requires that Dexter verify his target's guilt before killing them. He's supposed to be absolutely certain that the person has killed and escaped justice. But how does Dexter verify this? In practice, he uses police databases, personal surveillance, and his own analysis. He breaks into people's homes looking for evidence. He follows them, he monitors their activities, and then he makes a judgment call. The problem is that Dexter is not a judge, he's not a jury. He's a forensic analyst with a severe personality disorder who is motivated primarily by his own need to kill. His verification process is not subject to the standards that the actual justice system requires. There's no defense attorney challenging his evidence. There's no independent review. There's no appeals process. And over the course of the series, Dexter makes mistakes. The most devastating example is the Jonathan Farrow case in Season 4. Dexter kills Farrow, a celebrity photographer, believing him to be a murderer. But after the kill, the show reveals that Farrow's personal assistant was the actual killer. Dexter killed an innocent man. The scene where Dexter realizes what he's done, sinking to the floor of his dark lab and whispering, "I killed an innocent man," is one of the most haunting moments in the series. But the show moves past it relatively quickly. There's no lasting consequence for this failure of the code. No systemic change to Dexter's verification process. No deeper reckoning with the fact that the code's safeguards are inadequate. And Farrow isn't the only questionable kill. Throughout the series, there are instances where Dexter's confirmation of guilt is based on evidence that would not hold up under any kind of scrutiny. He takes circumstances at face value. He trusts his own instincts, which are driven not by a commitment to justice, but by a compulsion to kill. The code provides the illusion of moral structure, but in practice, it's a set of guidelines that Dexter follows when it's convenient, and bends or breaks when it isn't. This matters for the plot hole discussion because the code is presented as the reason Dexter is sympathetic. Without the code, he's just a serial killer. With it, he's a vigilante. And audiences have a much easier time rooting for vigilantes. But the code's unreliability undermines the moral framework that the entire show is built on, and the show doesn't always confront that as honestly as it could. When it does confront it, like in the Farrow case, it's powerful. But those moments are exceptions rather than the rule. The code also has a practical problem. Harry taught it to Dexter when Dexter was young, based on the world as it existed in the 1980s and early 1990s. But the world changed. Forensic technology advanced exponentially. DNA analysis went from experimental to routine. Security cameras went from rare to ubiquitous. Cell phone tracking became standard investigative procedure. Digital forensics emerged as an entire field. The code's primary rule, don't get caught, assumes a static technological environment. But Dexter operates across a period of massive technological change. The methods that kept him safe in the early years of his killing career should be progressively less effective as surveillance technology improves. By the time we get to the later seasons, Dexter should be operating in a world where his methods are significantly harder to conceal. But the show doesn't fully engage with this. Dexter continues to operate essentially the same way throughout all 8 seasons with only minor adaptations. The code doesn't evolve with the technology, and neither does Dexter's approach. In New Blood, which is set in approximately 2021, the technology gap is even more pronounced. Dexter is operating in an era of ubiquitous smartphones, social media, and advanced forensic capabilities. His methods should be nearly impossible to conceal. And to the show's credit, New Blood does present a Dexter who is getting caught, who is making mistakes, who is operating in a world that's closing in on him. But the mechanics of how he's caught are questionable, as we discussed with Angela's investigation, and the show doesn't always connect his exposure to technological advancement in a way that feels organic. Let me also spend some time on a category of plot holes that I think gets discussed less frequently but is just as significant: the emotional and psychological inconsistencies in Dexter's character. The show establishes early on that Dexter is a psychopath. He lacks genuine emotional connections. He doesn't feel love, empathy, or remorse in the way that neurotypical people do. His relationships are performative. His emotional expressions are masks that he wears to fit in. This is the fundamental premise of his character. But over the course of 8 seasons, this premise erodes significantly. Dexter develops genuine feelings for Rita, even if he can't fully articulate them. He loves Harrison in a way that goes beyond the code's utility. His relationship with Deborah is deep and real and emotionally complex. His grief after Rita's death is genuine. His bond with Lumen is real, even if temporary. His love for Hannah is presented as transformative. By the end of the series, Dexter has experienced fear, love, grief, loyalty, sacrifice, and profound loss. These are not the experiences of someone who lacks emotional capacity. This isn't exactly a plot hole. It's more of a character evolution that contradicts the character's established foundation. And you could argue that it's intentional, that the show is about Dexter discovering he's more human than he thought, that the darkness doesn't define him as completely as Harry told him it would, and that reading is valid and even compelling. But it creates a problem for the show's internal logic. If Dexter is genuinely capable of love and connection, then the code's premise that Dexter kills because he has to, because the urges are uncontrollable and can only be channeled, is undermined. If he can love, if he can connect, if he can feel, then maybe he can also choose not to kill. Maybe the darkness isn't an inevitability, but a habit, one that he could break with enough support and effort. And if that's the case, then every kill in the later seasons carries a different moral weight. He's not doing it because he must, he's doing it because he's choosing to. And that makes him considerably less sympathetic. The show flirts with this idea, particularly in the Rita relationship and later with Hannah. There are moments where Dexter wonders if he could stop, if he could be normal, if the dark passenger could be silenced. But the show never fully commits to answering that question because answering it would end the premise. If Dexter can choose not to kill, there's no more show. So the question stays open and the character exists in this paradoxical space where he simultaneously has and lacks emotional depth, depending on what the scene requires. Now, I want to talk about something that spans the entire franchise and that I think ties many of these plot holes together. It's what I'd call the coincidence problem. Throughout all of Dexter, the plot relies heavily on coincidences that favor the protagonist. Not just occasionally, but consistently. Dexter happens to be at the right place at the right time. Evidence that could expose him happens to be destroyed by someone else. People who suspect him happen to die before they can act on their suspicions. Investigations happen to be derailed by external factors just when they're getting close. In Season 2, Lila happens to find the cabin where Dexter is holding Dokes and happens to blow it up, killing Dokes and destroying the evidence. In Season 5, Stan Liddy happens to confront Dexter alone rather than turning his evidence over to the police. In Season 7, Deborah happens to be at the shipping container when Dexter confronts LaGuerta, creating the situation where she kills LaGuerta to protect him. In Season 8, the hurricane happens to provide cover for Dexter's escape. Each of these coincidences, taken individually, is defensible. Stories need plot mechanics, and sometimes those mechanics involve timing and chance. But the accumulation is striking. Dexter doesn't just survive because he's careful and clever. He survives because the universe of the show consistently arranges itself in his favor. Threats neutralize themselves, witnesses die, evidence vanishes, investigations stall. The world of Dexter is one where the protagonist has extraordinary luck on top of extraordinary skill, and the combination of the two makes his survival feel less like an achievement and more like an authorial decision. This is one of those things that most viewers don't consciously notice while watching because the show is so good at creating tension and investment. When Lila blows up the cabin, you're not thinking about statistical probability. You're thinking about the immediate dramatic consequences. When Quinn drops his investigation, you're not calculating the odds of a detective abandoning concrete evidence. You're thinking about Quinn's personal struggles and his relationship with Deborah. The show is excellent at redirecting your attention to the emotional story, which is where it excels. But the underlying structure, the architecture of coincidence that keeps Dexter alive, is a plot hole in itself, not any single coincidence, but the pattern. And this connects to something broader about serial killer fiction in general. The genre requires its protagonist to be uncatchable, or at least uncaught for the duration of the story. This means the world around them has to be slightly dumber, slightly less attentive, slightly more cooperative than the real world would be. And Dexter is far from the only show that has this problem. Any story about a criminal protagonist, from Breaking Bad to Hannibal to You, has to navigate the same tension between realism and narrative necessity. The question is just how gracefully the show manages it. And for what it's worth, I think Dexter manages it more gracefully than most, especially in its early seasons. The first 4 seasons in particular do a remarkable job of making Dexter's survival feel earned. The threats are real. The tension is genuine. The near misses are plausible. It's in the later seasons when the accumulated weight of years of storytelling starts to press down on the show's logic that the coincidences become more visible and the gaps become harder to overlook. But that's the nature of long-running television. Every show that goes past a certain number of seasons starts to show wear. The early magic of the premise gives way to the grinding reality of keeping the story going. Characters who should have learned things haven't. Situations that should have resolved themselves keep recurring. And the suspension of disbelief that came easily in Season 1 requires more and more effort by Season 7 or 8. Dexter is no exception, but it's also no less remarkable for its flaws. The show created one of the most iconic characters in television history, a character so compelling that we've been talking about him for nearly 20 years, and the franchise is still going. The plot holes we've been discussing tonight aren't reasons to dismiss the show. They're reasons to engage with it more deeply, to think about how stories work, why certain choices are made, and what the trade-offs of those choices are. Every plot hole is a window into the creative process. When Dexter hides his blood slides in an air vent, that's the writers choosing dramatic tension over practical realism. When Quinn drops his investigation, that's the story deciding to pursue a different direction at the cost of narrative logic. When the lumberjack ending ignores basic physics, that's a show prioritizing a shocking image over a coherent resolution. These aren't mistakes in the sense that nobody noticed. They're choices that were made for reasons, usually dramatic ones, that happen to leave logical gaps. And understanding that, appreciating it, even being amused by it, that's part of what it means to really love a show. You don't have to think it's perfect to think it's great. You don't have to ignore the flaws to enjoy the strengths. And sometimes, sitting here talking about the flaws is its own kind of enjoyment. A way of showing how much attention you've paid, how much the story got under your skin, how much you cared. Now, since we've covered the big structural issues, let me spend some time on the more specific scene-level plot holes that are scattered throughout the series. Because some of these are genuinely funny once you notice them, and they're the kind of thing that makes rewatching Dexter feel like a treasure hunt. Let's start with what I think of as the security camera problem, because it comes up so often across all seasons that it almost deserves its own category. We live in a world of surveillance. Cameras are everywhere. Buildings, parking lots, traffic intersections, ATMs, businesses, airports, hospitals, gas stations, hotels. In a major metropolitan area like Miami, it's nearly impossible to move through public space without being captured on camera multiple times. And yet Dexter operates as though surveillance technology hasn't been invented. I mentioned the Season 6 example earlier, where Dexter carries an unconscious Travis Marshall, a large sword, and his toddler son out of a high-rise building without appearing on a single security camera. But that's far from the only instance. In Season 7, Dexter kills Victor Baskoff at the Miami airport. Not at a distant location that happens to be near the airport, at the actual airport in the unclaimed baggage area. This is a building with more security cameras per square foot than almost any other type of public facility. Airports are among the most surveilled locations in the world, especially in post-9/11 America. Every corridor, every terminal, every baggage area, every entrance and exit is monitored. And Dexter commits a murder inside one and walks away without the footage ever becoming a factor in the investigation. Now, the show doesn't completely ignore this. The killing of Victor does have consequences. Isaac Serco, Victor's boss in the Koshka Brotherhood, tracks the murder back to Dexter through other means. But the surveillance footage itself, which would show Dexter entering the area, being present during the time of death, and leaving afterward, is never mentioned. In any real investigation of a murder at an airport, the first thing law enforcement would do is pull every frame of security footage from the surrounding area. It would be the primary source of evidence, and Dexter's face would be all over it. The airport comes up again in the Season 8 finale, as we discussed, when Dexter plants the backpack to frame Elway. Same problem, same building type, same ubiquitous camera coverage, same complete absence of consequences from the footage. And it's not just airports. In Season 4, Dexter breaks into Arthur Mitchell's, the Trinity Killer's, house multiple times. He enters the man's home, searches through his belongings, and even confronts him there. In an era where home security systems and doorbell cameras were becoming increasingly common, the idea that Trinity, who is wealthy and who has secrets of his own to protect, doesn't have any form of home security is notable. Though to be fair, the show is set in 2009, and smart home security wasn't quite as ubiquitous as it would become in the following decade. So I'll give that one a partial pass. In Season 3, Dexter kills Freebo in the drug dealer's own house. He does this somewhat impulsively, which the show acknowledges. But the house is in a neighborhood. Neighbors have eyes, cars drive by, and Dexter has to transport the body from the house to his car and then to his boat. This kind of thing happens throughout the series. Dexter is constantly moving bodies and suspicious materials through neighborhoods, parking lots, and public spaces without being observed. It's one of those foundational suspension of disbelief requirements that the show asks for and mostly gets away with. But it accumulates over time. The hospital in the series finale is another egregious example. Dexter walks into a hospital during a hurricane evacuation, enters Deborah's room, disconnects her from life support, wraps her body, carries her through corridors where other staff are visible in the background, takes her through the building, and exits to his boat. Hospitals have cameras in hallways, at entrances and exits, in intensive care units, and near elevators. The nurses stationed for Deborah's unit would have monitoring equipment that shows patient vitals, and disconnecting life support would trigger alarms. None of this matters in the show. Dexter moves through the hospital like a ghost, which is poetic but not realistic. I think the reason the camera problem persists throughout the series is that addressing it would fundamentally change the show. If Dexter had to account for camera coverage, every kill would require an additional layer of planning and explanation. The writers would have to show him identifying camera positions, planning routes that avoid coverage, potentially disabling cameras, and dealing with the digital evidence trail. That would make every kill sequence longer and more technical, potentially at the expense of the character drama that makes the show work. So the cameras are simply invisible. They exist in the real world, but not in Dexter's world. And most of the time, viewers accept this because the alternative, a show that spends half its runtime on surveillance evasion, would be a different and probably less entertaining show. Now, let me talk about something that's more niche, but that I find really entertaining. The medical and forensic errors that crop up throughout the series. These aren't plot holes exactly. They're factual errors in how the show portrays medical procedures and forensic science. But they're worth mentioning because Dexter is a show that prides itself on its forensic accuracy, and some of these mistakes are pretty glaring once you know what to look for. One of the most commonly cited is from the original pilot, where Dexter describes how the ice truck killer's victim was killed and mentions a specific anatomical detail. He says the foot was severed between the tarsus and the metatarsus, which are the mid-foot bones. But the visual clearly shows the foot severed through the tibia and fibula, which are leg bones well above the ankle. It's a significant anatomical error from the show's own forensic expert, which is ironic given that getting these details right is literally his job. In another early episode, Dexter refers to punching someone in the liver and indicates the left side of the body. The liver is on the right side. It's one of the most basic anatomical facts, and it's the kind of thing that a forensic analyst would never get wrong. It's a script error rather than a character error, meaning the writers made the mistake rather than the character being portrayed as making it. But it's still funny given the show's forensic setting. There's also a moment where someone refers to administering an epidural in the neck. An epidural is administered into the epidural space of the vertebral column, typically in the lumbar region of the lower back. You don't give an epidural in the neck. There are other spinal procedures that involve the cervical spine, but they wouldn't be called an epidural. Again, it's the kind of medical terminology error that slips past the writer's room but stands out to anyone with medical knowledge. These small errors are common in television. Every medical show, every legal show, every forensic show gets details wrong. It's almost unavoidable because the writers are storytellers, not practitioners, and the priority is always dramatic impact over technical accuracy. But in a show where the main character's expertise is the foundation of the premise, these errors carry a little extra sting. Now let me spend a few minutes on the plastic wrap, because I don't think this gets talked about enough, and it's one of those things that seems obvious once someone points it out, but that you might never think about on your own. Dexter's kill ritual involves wrapping the victim to a table with plastic wrap, the same kind you'd use in a kitchen, and covering the room in plastic sheeting. The plastic wrap on the body serves two purposes. It restrains the victim, and it catches the blood when Dexter makes the kill, preventing it from spraying onto surfaces that he'd then have to clean. But here's the thing about plastic wrap. It's not absorbent, it doesn't soak up blood, it creates a surface that blood sits on. And when you're dealing with the kind of blood volume that a stab wound to the chest produces, which is considerable, that blood has to go somewhere. It pools on the plastic, it runs along the contours of the body, it drips off edges. The idea that plastic wrap neatly contains the blood from a violent stabbing is a significant simplification of what would actually happen. In practice, Dexter's kill rooms would be incredibly messy. Blood would pool on the table, run off the sides, seep between layers of wrap, and potentially reach surfaces underneath. Even with floor covering, the volume of blood from a fatal wound would be extremely difficult to contain using plastic wrap alone. Forensic cleaning would be a major undertaking, not something you could handle with a quick wipe down and removal of the plastic. And then there's the disposal of the plastic itself. Dozens of square feet of blood-soaked plastic sheeting, plus the plastic wrap from the body, plus any towels or materials used for cleanup. All of this has to go somewhere. Dexter presumably bags it and disposes of it, possibly along with the body parts on the boat. But that's a significant volume of forensically rich material. Bloody plastic in a dumpster, in a trash can, in a landfill. That's evidence that can be found and tested. The show simplifies all of this because showing Dexter spend 45 minutes meticulously cleaning up blood splash patterns and bagging dozens of square feet of plastic wouldn't make for great television. And I genuinely don't fault the show for this. The kill room is iconic precisely because of its visual simplicity. The clean white plastic, the controlled environment, the ritual precision. It's a signature image of the series. But from a practical standpoint, it's one of the biggest stretches the show consistently makes. Let me also circle back to something I touched on earlier but want to expand on. The matter of Dexter's boat and the specific issue of how often he uses it for disposal without the marina community noticing. Dexter docks the Slice of Life at the Bay Harbor Marina. He's a regular presence there. The dockmaster knows him. Other boat owners know him. He has a slip that he uses consistently, and he regularly takes the boat out at unusual hours, often at night, often alone, and returns before morning. Now, marina communities are social. Boat owners talk to each other. They notice who comes and goes. They're particularly attentive to nighttime activity because marinas are targets for theft and vandalism. The idea that Dexter can load heavy bags onto his boat, motor out at midnight, return a few hours later, and do this on a regular basis without the marina community noticing or caring is a stretch. In Season 2, when the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation goes public, the FBI starts looking at boat registrations and marina records. This is exactly the kind of investigative step that should identify Dexter. He has a registered boat at a marina in the geographic area of the dump sites. He has a pattern of nighttime excursions that correlates with the timing of disappearances. And yet, even when the investigation gets this close, Dexter isn't flagged. The investigation focuses on other leads, and the marina angle doesn't lead to him specifically. There's actually a subtle detail in the show that makes this worse. Dexter's boat is called the Slice of Life. It's a pun on his forensic work since he slices blood spatter patterns for analysis, but it's also a pretty on-the-nose name for a boat owned by a man who dismembers people. If anyone at the marina ever stopped to think about the quiet forensic analyst who takes his boat out at midnight and named it Slice of Life, they might have had some concerns. But nobody in the Dexter universe seems to have a fully functional sense of irony. I want to also mention something about Dexter's apartment that goes beyond the blood slide issue. Throughout the series, Dexter's apartment serves as his base of operations. He stores his kill tools there, he keeps his slides there, he does research there, he plans his kills there. The apartment is essentially the headquarters of his serial killing operation, and it has floor-to-ceiling windows. This is a production design choice more than a plot hole, but it's worth noting because the apartment's design works against the premise. Dexter is supposed to be a man of secrecy, someone who hides his true nature behind a carefully constructed facade. And his apartment is a glass box. Anyone with binoculars from a nearby building could see inside. Anyone walking by could glance in. The windows are large, they're uncovered for much of the series, and they look out onto a waterfront area where people are present. In Season 7, when Deborah discovers Dexter's slides, he has them spread out on his coffee table, in front of those floor-to-ceiling windows, at night with the lights on. Anyone looking in from outside would see a man examining a collection of blood samples on his coffee table surrounded by what appear to be surgical instruments. It's the kind of detail that you don't think about while watching because the scene is so emotionally intense. But on reflection, Dexter's operational security is remarkably poor for a man who's supposedly a genius at not getting caught. And let me mention one more thing that I think is really interesting from a character perspective. Throughout the series, Dexter's colleagues describe him in ways that should actually be raising red flags. They call him creepy. They notice he's emotionally flat. Masuka makes jokes about Dexter being a serial killer, which everyone laughs off. There's a running theme of people around Dexter sensing that something is off, but dismissing it as quirky or harmless. In real criminal psychology, this is actually one of the most common post-capture observations that people make about serial offenders. Oh, he was quiet, he kept to himself, something always seemed a little off, but we never thought much of it. The show plays with this dynamic beautifully, having characters voice exactly the kind of observations that would be damning in hindsight. But in the moment, within the show, these observations never coalesce into suspicion. People notice that Dexter is strange, but they don't connect strangeness to danger. It's realistic in the sense that real people do overlook red flags in people they know. But it's also another brick in the wall of institutional and social blindness that keeps Dexter free. You know, I've been talking for a while now, and I realize we've covered an enormous amount of ground tonight. From the blood slides in the air vent to the lumberjack ending, from Dokes' doomed investigation to Angela's impossible Google search, from the security cameras that don't exist to the plastic wrap that defies physics. We've gone through nearly 20 years of Dexter storytelling and found the places where the seams show. But before we wind down, I want to talk about something that I think puts all of these plot holes in a different light. Because there's a version of this conversation that's purely negative, where pointing out flaws is just about tearing something down. And I don't want to end on that note, because that's not what this is about. Not for me, at least. The truth is, plot holes exist in every long-running story. Every show, every film franchise, every book series that spans enough installments will eventually contradict itself, stretch its own logics, or ask the audience to accept something that doesn't quite make sense. Breaking Bad, which is often cited as one of the most tightly plotted shows in television history, has its own logical gaps. The Wire, which might be the most realistic portrayal of institutional life ever put on screen, takes liberties with police procedure. Game of Thrones, The Sopranos, Better Call Saul, even single-season anthologies like True Detective have moments where the plot bends to accommodate the story the writers want to tell rather than the story that strict logic would produce. What separates a good show from a bad one isn't the absence of plot holes. It's whether the show gives you enough to care about that you're willing to accept them. And Dexter, at its best, gives you more than enough. Think about what the show actually accomplishes. It takes a character who is, by any objective definition, a monster, and makes you root for him. Not because you agree with what he does, but because Michael C. Hall's performance is so nuanced, so internally rich, that you understand him. You see the world through his eyes. You feel his struggle between the darkness and the desire for normalcy. You care about his relationships, his family, his moments of genuine human connection. And when those connections are threatened, whether by the season's villain or by his own actions, you feel the tension genuinely and deeply. That's not easy to do. That's one of the hardest things a television show can attempt, making the audience invest emotionally in a protagonist who is fundamentally morally compromised. And Dexter does it for 8 seasons and beyond. The fact that the audience stays engaged despite knowing that Dexter is a killer. Despite knowing that his worldview is distorted, despite knowing that the code is more justification than justice, that's a testament to the power of the writing and the performances. And the plot holes? They're the cost of doing business. When your premise is this extreme, when your protagonist is this compromised, when the story requires this many unlikely things to happen for the narrative to continue, gaps are inevitable. Every kill that Dexter gets away with is a small act of narrative generosity. Every investigation that fizzles is the show choosing character drama over procedural realism. Every convenient coincidence is the writers deciding that the emotional story matters more than the logical one. Most of the time, they're right. The emotional story is what you remember. When you think about Dexter, you don't think about the security cameras that should have caught him. You think about the moment he finds Rita in the bathtub. You think about the look on his face when he realizes what Trinity has done. You think about Deborah finding out the truth. You think about Harrison pulling that trigger. Those are the moments that stick, and they stick because the show earned them through years of character development and relationship building that transcended the logical gaps. The plot holes are the price of admission for a show that swings as big as Dexter does. And honestly, they're part of the fun. Noticing them, cataloging them, debating them with other fans, that's an extension of the engagement that the show created. You don't analyze the logic of a show you don't care about. The fact that we're here tonight, going through these inconsistencies scene by scene, is proof that the show did something right. It made us care enough to pay attention. I also think there's something worth saying about the evolution of the franchise and what the plot holes tell us about how long running stories change over time. The Dexter of Season 1 is a different show than the Dexter of Season 8. The original series started with a clear, focused premise, a serial killer who hides in plain sight within a police department, and it explored that premise with tightness and precision. The first 4 seasons, whatever their individual strengths and weaknesses, are built on a solid foundation. The plot holes exist, but they're relatively minor, and the storytelling is strong enough to carry them. As the show continued, the foundation started to crack. New characters were introduced and dropped without resolution. Storylines were started and abandoned. The show's internal mythology expanded in ways that sometimes contradicted what came before. By Season 8, the logic gaps were significant enough that they began to affect the viewing experience for many fans. And then New Blood tried to correct course, only to introduce its own problems. And then Original Sin tried to fill in the backstory, only to create timeline contradictions. And now Resurrection is trying to continue a story that's been started, stopped, revised, and restarted multiple times. This is what happens when a story becomes a franchise. The original vision, however clear it was, gets pulled in different directions by different creative teams, network demands, audience expectations, and commercial pressures. The plot holes we've been discussing aren't just accidents. They're the visible traces of creative decisions made by different people at different times for different reasons. And understanding that, I think, helps you appreciate both the achievements and the limitations of what Dexter accomplished. The show at its best was a meditation on the nature of evil, the possibility of redemption, and the question of whether a man who was made into a monster can ever become something else. Those themes transcend the plot holes. They're what make Dexter enduring, and they're what keep people coming back to the franchise despite its flaws, because the questions it asks are genuinely interesting and the character at its center is genuinely compelling. So no, I don't think the plot holes make Dexter a bad show. I think they make it a human one. Created by humans with deadlines and constraints and creative disagreements and network notes. Performed by humans doing their best to bring complicated characters to life. And watched by humans who are willing to accept imperfection in exchange for something that moves them. That's a pretty good deal if you ask me. In a future video, I'd love to dive into some other Dexter topics, maybe a deep dive into the franchise's villains. From the ice truck killer to Kirk Caldwell, ranking them and analyzing what makes each one work or not work. Or maybe a full timeline reconstruction, trying to piece together a consistent chronology from the original series through Original Sin and beyond. Or even a look at the psychology of the show, how accurately it portrays psychopathy. What real criminal psychologists think of Dexter's characterization, and whether the code would actually work as a behavioral management tool. There's honestly so much to talk about with this franchise, and if tonight's conversation is any indication, we could be here for a while. Which, for a sleep video, I suppose is sort of the point. But for now, that's where we'll leave things. We've walked through the biggest, the most frustrating, the most amusing, and the most thought-provoking plot holes in the Dexter franchise. From the air conditioning blood slides to the hurricane escape, from the world's worst police department to the world's most invisible serial killer. From a show that started with one of the most brilliant premises in television history to a franchise that's still trying to figure out what to do with it 20 years later. Wherever you are tonight, I hope this was a comfortable way to wind down. Whether you're a longtime Dexter fan who's been nodding along and thinking of plot holes I didn't mention, or someone who's just hearing about some of these for the first time, I appreciate you being here. If you enjoyed this, feel free to subscribe or leave a comment. I'd love to hear which plot holes bother you the most, or if there are any I missed that you think deserve a mention. There are certainly more out there. 8 seasons, 2 revival series, a prequel, and whatever comes next, the franchise has given us a lot to work with. And the community of fans who care about these details is one of the best things about being part of the Dexter audience. We notice things, we remember things, we compare notes, and we do it because we love the show, not in spite of its flaws, but alongside them. And if nothing else, I hope tonight reminded you of how special Dexter is as a piece of television. It's the kind of show that invites you to think about it long after the credits roll, not just what happened in the plot, but why it happened, what choices the creators made and why they made them, what the story is really about underneath all the blood and plastic wrap and moonlit boat rides. Because underneath all of it, underneath the plot holes and the logical stretches and the dropped storylines, there's a story about a man trying to figure out if he's human. And that's a story worth telling, even imperfectly. Maybe especially imperfectly. Because aren't we all in our own much less dramatic ways trying to figure out the same thing? But for now, the dark passenger can rest. Stay safe and sweet dreams.